Hello, my name is Mel Tingey. I'm the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer at STG. We're a consulting firm located in Salt Lake City serving clients all throughout the United States. For today's Executive Excellence webinar, we have with me Rich Farr, good friend of mine. He is the Vice President of Technology at CR England. They're a trucking company located here in Salt Lake City. About a $1.5 billion company. Yep. Family-owned, privately held, but they work all across the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, we have trucks, well, not Canada, but
not
throughout
Canada.
the U.S. We do a lot into Mexico, but primarily all over the United States.
Oh, very cool. Rich and I go back. I think we've known each other about 20 years or more.
Probably right at 20 years is when we started working
together. Anyway, really appreciate you being here today. The topic that we're going to focus on today is on digital transformation. What it looks like, what it's looked like for you, most particularly at CR England, but also even with other, obviously you've been around a long time in the industry, and
I think you just called me old.
it's the nice way of saying you and I have been around a long time. We're both old, but just a little more background on Rich. You've been at CR England for, I think, 12 years.
12 years.
12 years. What I'd love for you to do is start by just explaining a little bit more in detail what CR England does, a little bit about their history and kind of what brought you there.
Sure. Like you said, CR England's a fairly large trucking company. We've been around, I think we were founded in 1920. So one of the very early trucking companies in the United States and one of the more successful ones. So we're 105 years old now, still a family-owned venture, have trucks all over the United States, have brokerage operations as well. And I've been there, like you said, for 12 years. When I first was looking to go to this job, I looked at it and said, it's trucking. How hard could it be? My career up to that point had been in various technology organizations and organizations that were very technology-centric. And then looking at a trucking company, I thought, it's going to be a piece of cake. I mean, you drive a truck back and forth across the road, but it's interesting to see how dependent that industry is on technology and how much technology can influence the success of a company in transportation. And also, it's a lot faster moving than I ever would have thought. A lot more demanding than I would have thought. But again, it's a great company. It's family owned, very stable, has been seen by the industry for quite some time as one of the innovators in technology and the use of technology, especially communications technology. I think we were the first customer to start using Qualcomm devices, as they were called.
Wow.
Which was, putting telematics devices in the actual trucks, quite a few years ago, obviously, so that we could actually track our trucks and communicate to our drivers without our drivers having to, pull over and use a payphone on the side of the road way back when. And so the company has always kind of prided itself a little bit on use of and adoption of technologies to improve its operations.
Very cool. Yeah, that's now standard practice, correct? Everybody does that.
Yep, everybody.
That's interesting. A relative of mine worked for a company that sold devices to monitor the temperature in refrigerated trucks.
Right.
So in the supply chain, if the temperature of certain goods drops below or gets too hot or too cold, they have to report it. And so that device was instrumental. It was kind of revolutionary, even how I did it. But I can imagine when CR England first started putting those types of devices, but they were probably the pioneer.
It was brand new. Yeah. Very, very early adopters of that stuff. And, things like most of what we do is temp controlled now as well. So all of our trailers have monitors on them so we can tell if the refrigeration unit, the reefer as we call it, is running, if it's set right, if there's any errors, everything like that. And so that kind of adoption of communications and more IoT has just become part of the industry now. So you just have to know the condition of these assets, especially since trucking is such a thin margin, focused on efficiency type of industry, you have to make sure that everything is running very clean. And so being able to monitor and know the condition of everything, where it's at, if there's an issue, becomes paramount to your success.
Wow, that's impressive. So let's jump into the topic of digital transformation. The folks that watch our webinars are, typically C-suite individuals. They're CEOs, COOs, CFOs. We have no problem with the tech industry, tech people watching. We oftentimes get some really good questions that come from them as well. But really, we try to target this on
Sure.
more of the business C-suite folks. And one thing that continues to be this ongoing question is, what does digital transformation mean? I'd love to hear your perspective. Like, how do you define it, and how do you define it for Sierra England?
It's a great question. There's a lot of different definitions out there. A lot of people think about just moving from a paper-based system to electronic, and certainly that's part of it. But for us, becoming digital is really about adopting and adapting your business processes to have more agility, not just to run faster and more efficient, but to be able to change more quickly, right? And so to create this underlying foundation that as demands change or as the industry changes, we can change our processes very quickly with it. All while trying to make those processes more efficient, but recognizing that, next year there might be some new regulation out, or one of our large customers may have a new requirement, and we have to move our systems, our processes, our people, all to be able to adapt very quickly. And so to me, that's what the underlying piece of it is being able to bring that business agility in.
I love that. It's interesting when you and I were talking earlier today. One thing that stood out in my mind. You were talking about is how the margin in the trucking industry is just so razor thin. I can imagine that even that agility to move has to be done even within the small constraints that you work with. It's like you don't have the luxury of, trying out some new technology that could potentially be millions of dollars and then be a failure. You've got to speak to that. I'm just curious, like, how you manage that part of the pressure that exists within the trucking industry.
Yeah, it's tough because, again, I mentioned earlier, trucking moves a lot faster than I would have thought. And so a lot of our customers will come in and say, hey, from now on we'll only accept this type of trailer, for example, at this facility. Well, the several thousand trailers we have, how do we change? So we say, well, only these trailers can go for this customer now. And so we've had to build this underlying architecture so that we can make those adjustments very quickly without having to go out and buy a bunch of new trailers. Well, all these trailers are on the East Coast. This customer's on the West Coast. How do we do that? We have to be able to, without disrupting the flow of work, be able to say, oh, now we have to track in our system where this type of trailer is at so that we can prioritize them over for this other customer, and do that without increasing margins. It can't be a, big, expensive project. It has to just come in and be done quickly and move along. There are certain times that we will invest in, call it bets. We're going to go off and invest in this one.
Sure.
Like every company has to, but generally we need to, when we're making those bets, we have to look at them in how does this impact this base that we work on. We measure everything as cost per mile, and we go down to the fractions of a cent. How does this impact cost per mile in, tenths and hundredths of a cent? And if it impacts our cost per mile, it better have a positive revenue impact as well, or we just can't do it. And so focusing all of our processes, initiatives on those things is, again, that's where we focus.
That's amazing. So I want to have you describe, often when especially as long as you've been at CR England, a lot of times when you set a strategy for technology, you'll work that strategy for 2-3 years, only to learn that it got you just to a new vista. It got you to a new plateau that then opened up a new set of challenges, opportunities. Like you said, digital transformation for CR England really is creating that business agility. In the 12 years you've been with CR England, describe some of those milestones that you've hit, and then what it did, like what you got to, and then what it opened up for you to do again. Like, I'm curious, what were the level up activities that occurred in that time frame?
So, when I first came in, the first piece that we had to do was look at our overall systems and processes and identify how we could bring order to them. We had, like every company, too many. They didn't all work together. People were using different systems to do the same activities and so forth. And so in part, we went around and said, okay, for this process, what is going to be the system of record for this type of data and to manage this process? And we broke that down into kind of these big chunks, maintenance, freight dispatch, recruiting, which is a big part of what we do, and some of the main activities. And we focused really on our transportation management system, which is the whole freight management, freight dispatch and tracking and so forth. But as soon as we got that to a point where we thought that where it became more clean, at least, it started exposing other pieces of data to us about, the interaction between our maintenance processes and our dispatch processes, and started helping us understand gaps in where our trucks weren't being utilized, or where they were sitting in a maintenance facility for too long, or where, because we were missing maintenance, we were maybe having other issues down the road, literally, that would have impacted, our ability to deliver freight. And so just getting that transportation management system up and operating in a clean state exposed a lot of opportunities for us. And then you lift those up, and like you say, every time you climb a hill, you see a new horizon out there that presents opportunities to us. But for us, the first one was getting just kind of that core business of transportation management going, and then the peripheral systems started to show opportunities in it.
And I appreciate that clarity. It paints a picture that is very understandable. What I'm curious about, also in the context of what you just explained, you've obviously spoken very highly of the England family and the leadership that exists there. I'd love to hear their level of engagement with you. Like, did they participate in some of those strategy sessions? Do they have you build them and then take them to you? Like, do you build the strategy and take it to them for ratification? I'm just curious what that interplay looks like as you've kind of leveled up each time, what level of involvement the executives had with you.
Sure. Like I mentioned to you, the CR England, it's a family-owned business. The owners of the company are very involved in the business. In a lot of ways, it operates like a small business because they are so involved in every aspect. And so I wouldn't say that I'm building a strategy and taking it to them or vice versa. It really is a lot more collaborative. A lot of times they'll come with a vision of, hey, how can we accomplish such and such? Some of the times those opportunities will come from our customers or other parts of the business. But generally, it is a lot more collaborative, where we may present opportunities from the technology space of, hey, look at this new thing that's out here, or ways that other companies are using this. How could we apply this to our business? And a lot of times it'll be them coming in. But then once we land on whatever that strategy is, they are very involved, right? Because at the end of the day, if they hand it to us in a vacuum and we, 3 months or 6 months or however much later, pull the covers off of it, it's got to be right. And so it's one thing I appreciate about CR England and the ownership and the management there is they're very involved as we're building new systems and as we're changing processes, that they kind of guide them along the way. And it has to be that way.
Yeah,
it has otherwise it's going to fail.
Yeah. So I want you to take a look, Alan. I want you to share this. Alan's our recording artist. I'm going to start calling you that, Alan. He's our recording artist. I really do appreciate you, Alan, for lots of reasons. But this framework we use with our clients kind of outlines the 9 major areas of a business's technology landscape. I'm curious to have you speak to this in a way that, like as you've leveled up over the last 12 years, some of the things you've told me as you and I have talked even over those years, how you would hit certain things, you'd work on them, it switches priorities. I'd love to have you speak to some of them in the context of projects you've done and where the focus shifted in kind of thinking about this through this framework.
Sure. Just starting with leadership and people as one of the key components. That's one of the things that we're very proud of, that we have over the years built a team that we feel is very embedded and involved with the business. So it's no longer, the business over here and these tech guys in their little dark corner doing whatever they do, but we're very embedded with them. And that's helped. One of the things that we've needed to do as a company is improve the way we interact with recruit, onboard, and then treat drivers throughout their life cycle. Truck driving has a high turnover of employees, especially of truck drivers, and they are what drives the business, literally, again. And so we saw that we had a need to do better at employee retention, providing them a better lifestyle, providing them better work opportunities. And we've been able to accomplish a lot of that through systems in part. And through this, we've developed a team in IT that is their whole focus, is on that driver's experience, including a product manager that is embedded throughout the various parts of the business and is always looking for opportunities, whether it's rolling out a new phone system or a new driver management system or working on a recruiting system. It brings this consistent view of, let's keep the driver at the front and center. And our technologies have evolved so that we now have an end-to-end driver management platform that is used and leveraged across all various departments and divisions of the business. And so that's been transformative. And as that's happened, and not just because of that, but just this whole movement, our driver turnover has decreased significantly.
Which is a big deal in the trucking industry.
Huge, both in terms of cost savings. If you can hold on to a driver longer, your safety goes up, which again helps costs, but also keeps ourselves and the motoring public safer to have better drivers behind the wheel. And so just being able to develop processes, systems, and a focus on the life cycle of a driver has yielded huge results.
Wow, that's impressive. Anything else that jumps out with, I know you mentioned kind of that central hub. I'm curious in the data and analytics space, different things that you've done to help give, dashboards of data to different parts of the organization.
Yeah, so that's one of the things as we built this TMS, we also started viewing it as a hub of information and re-architected a lot of it so that we had cleaner data and so that data was also more easily able to interact with the other sources, our payroll system, our accounts receivable, accounts payable, our maintenance systems, our recruiting systems, so that they were all interacting together because there is this overlap. It caused us to re-architect a lot of what we did underneath, but now it's exposed where there's cleaner layers of data. It's been a challenge for some of the business because a lot of the business was used to doing their, old school banded reports off of SQL or whatever, and we've moved it to different types of databases, Mongo and things like that they weren't used to. And so there's been a little bit of an adoption problem there, but as they've become more used to it, now we're getting the data faster. It used to be some of these reports would run you know, every 24 hours or whatever as data sync together. And now it's becoming more real time so that we can have access to it. And the business can see exactly what's going on a lot easier. Most of the reporting now doesn't belong in IT at all. It's out in the business itself so they can do their own analytics, which is where I believe it should be.
Yeah, because
right?
then
we support the technology.
yeah,
And
the thought processes of a person sitting there actually can make an automatic correlation where a person in the back room won't see that correlation.
that's exactly right. But again, part of that was by saying, let's get the whole business working across this common data set rather than having these different islands of adventure, which is what we had
Islands.
a dozen years ago.
Islands of adventure.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Okay, Alan, you can probably take that down now. So let me switch gears, or not switch gears, but kind of go to the next section. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on, given the people who are going to be listening to this webinar, from a practitioner's perspective, what advice, what perspective would you give on common pitfalls, common misconceptions, things that if you were to know what you know now, go back, 10, 12 years ago, what would you do differently, or what would you navigate differently knowing what you know now?
I don't know that this is how I'd navigate it differently, but the one thing that I have learned and continue to learn is, as we're trying to transform a business, as we move towards this digital business, and digitalization, it's technology is a big part of it, but it's not a technology initiative. It's a business initiative. And anytime that I see something being handed to technology as go solve this for us and come back when it's solved, that's a huge red flag. And it's bound to fail or at least become way more expensive than it needs to be. And so that to me is the biggest pitfall. And we've all had those projects where it's like, we'll take it and we think we know better in IT than the rest of the business does. We'll go build it, and then you put it on the shelf and it doesn't work. And so for me, the biggest pitfall as a company's moving towards this is make sure that the business leaders, the line of business leaders, take ownership, right? That they're at least as invested in the success of the project as the people that are doing the implementation on the technology side. And it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And inside we have some business sponsors that embrace that and they understand it, and some that still want to say, no, you guys just take it. And a lot of it's because it's hard. But that's the biggest pitfall. And I've been suckered into it more than a few times in my career, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, we'll get it. Anytime now that I see that we don't have a business sponsor that is equally yoked, that's invested in the success of it, it's going to fail.
Yeah. Yep, I have witnessed the very same thing, and it's interesting too. For me, sometimes it's not even that you got suckered into it. Sometimes you even get almost forced into it. Sometimes even the power dynamics. Sometimes inside of an organization, you almost feel like we've almost got to just take this, and it takes a good leader like yourself to be able to, even peer to peer, sit down with those business leaders and say, okay, I get what you're asking us to do. We've got to have you engaged. We got to have you at the table. It's an iterative process. We're gonna both have our hand on the clay, and we're gonna mold this in a way that it actually will work. Because if the imbalance happens even the other way too much, that can be a problem. But the goal is that both are fully engaged. I've witnessed that over and over as well.
Well, and going back, on the little slide that you had up a little bit earlier, I talked to people and processes, right? That people thing is a big part inside of IT. Part of what we had to learn is we had to have people on board that knew how to guide and lead and communicate with and understand the business operations side of it too. We couldn't have people that showed up speaking, techniques and expect the business people to react to them. They had to be able to understand what the business was needing, and had to help also the business line leaders understand why a certain system or how a certain system worked, or why it was important to do it one way or the other. But too often, the technologists want to just say, well, this is the way it has to be. They have to be well versed in working and collaborating with the business, or again, it's going to be failure.
Yeah, that's well said. So some practical steps moving forward. You mentioned a few. Have you guys taken an approach with any sort of pilot, or like, I'm just curious in some of the early discovery or analysis work that you do, what are you doing to kind of pull as many decisions forward? Kind of the analogy of building a home. If you get all the way to where you're painting the walls, and then you realize you should have put electrical lines in the walls. Mm-hmm. That's pretty expensive to take the sheetrock off and then put electrical lines in. I'm just curious, what tactics or what things do you do to try to pull some of those decisions early in the discovery process?
That was a particularly painful analogy. I'm remodeling my home right now and redoing some of the remodeling already.
And I'm sure it's coming in right on budget.
Oh, clearly. Right on our builder's budget. But again, it's been a challenge because there's this tendency to want to be able to say, hey, here's what we need. We think we know what we need, and plop it all out there and hope it works. But that rarely does, right? And so we tend to start small with everything. I talked about this ecosystem that we've built for managing our drivers and that whole thing. We didn't build it all at once. We didn't even have the whole vision all at once. There's no way we could have. But we always try to say, look, let's just start with one piece that we know we can do and build it in a way that we know we're going to grow it over time, that it's going to expose new opportunities. And so in this one, we just started by saying, let's figure out how we can be more efficient at onboarding a new driver. And did that and started gaining data from that process. And then we said, okay, now we've made progress in onboarding. Now let's move from onboarding into over-the-road training. And that exposed, well, now we have to take a little detour and go and work with our trainers and build new training material, and things that we didn't even think of at first. And so we always try to take a very iterative, find the one piece that we think is essential, and then grow out from there. And what we found is down the road, that essential thing ended up being the small piece, and it exposed a lot more. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. But
I think it's a great answer. I've asked that question of lots of different people, and I have found that those who answer it the way you did have what I call staying power. You have the ability to continue to deliver value. The notion of technology trying to do too much, there's always this temptation, and the temptation comes from both sides of the aisle. It comes from both the business side as well as the technical side. That there's this desire to just do it all, and so the more you can pull in and kind of rein in, let's just solve this one problem, or let's just solve these two problems. And when we solve them, let's really solve them. Let's actually build it, implement it, evaluate it, refine it before we move on to the next. You're far more apt to be successful.
For a lot of reasons. One, that technology risk, you start to contain it instead of taking on all the technology risk all at once. But maybe even more importantly, as you start to roll it out by pieces or in pieces, you get adoption from users, and the cultural change that has to happen can go in. Otherwise, you're introducing this big, huge change across the organization, and people will naturally resist it. Partly because it probably wasn't done as well as it needed to be, and partly because people are resistant to change anyway. And so that iterative approach is imperative for the cultural and organizational changes that have to go with this transformation.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome. As we wrap up, I'd love for you just to kind of think about, the topic in general and your time at Sierra England. I'm just curious, what other thoughts come to mind, or anything anything else you'd want to share in the context of the initiatives you've been responsible for there.
Just that, looking back now for the past 12 years, the things that I thought were important at the beginning, some of them were, but there's just been so much more than I thought, and so I think that's the one thing that I try to be careful of, and my advice would be to everybody is when you jump into one of these initiatives, recognize that usually it's a lot deeper than you realized at the beginning. Just like my misconception that I stated at the beginning, how hard could trucking be? As I peeled back one layer after another, it just exposed more and more. And, as a business, as you go in and are starting with a new initiative to evolve or transform your business or whatever, recognize that along the way you're going to learn a lot, and by the end of that journey you're going to know a lot more than you realize there was even to know at the beginning. And so I think that's the thing, is I look back over the last 12 years, I'm like, holy cow, the stuff that I thought at the beginning, I only had that part of a picture. And I'm sure now, 12 years in, there's still huge chunks of the picture that I have yet to be uncovered. And, that's, I guess, the fun of it.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it's a fun journey. It really is. And especially when you have enough wins along the way that you can genuinely see the needle moving.
Yep.
You see the organization gaining the value. I love that you touched on culture. When systems are built correctly, it's remarkable what it does to the culture of an organization, because that oftentimes is their core interaction with an organization, is that the trucker that's logging onto their phone and they need to get information or update something or whatever, and so how they're interacting has a genuine connection to how they feel about the company, and especially if they know that they're being seen and observed and being taken care of, even if something doesn't work quite right. If they know, oh gosh, my company's going to take care of it, and I can guarantee in a month this is going to be resolved. Even that feeling within the mind and heart of an employee goes a long way. The systems and culture is a big deal. Well, Rich, thank you. I can't express enough my appreciation for you coming on.
For you, Mel, anything.
You're a good man. You've always been a good friend, and really appreciate you taking some time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.